I'll tell you this much. I'd rather be holding all this than be holding children. I posted a poll to ask you guys what you would love to see to celebrate 1,000 subscribers being surpassed here on the channel, and you all voted. I am bringing you guys my top 5 McFarlane Toys Batman figures so far. So a couple of things to cover before I get down to the countdown. Initially, I was going to do a stop motion animation kind of skit style aesthetic to this overall video, but that last April Fool's video that incorporated stop motion was a ginormous pain in the ass to get properly animated, edited, and rendered, to the point where I was almost late to the party as far as April Fool's videos are concerned. So because of that, I decided to forego the idea until I finally get myself a dedicated desktop that can handle that kind of workload. So I'm going with a much more traditional in front of the camera talking head style of countdown for the top 5 McFarlanes. And I'm also only counting the Batman figures that I've covered on the channel so far. So if your favorite McFarlane Batman is not showing up in this video, then that either means that I don't own the figure, or I do, but I have yet to cover it on the channel and review it and be included amongst the collections. And if you guys want to check out the potential review in the future, then feel free to hit the subscribe button down below and turn on notifications. And then a couple of other disclaimers to note is that 1, there are going to be links in the description of every single review for these Batman figures, so in case you guys have missed those reviews and you guys want some more detail that I will not cover in this video because it's going to be like a whole hour-long video, then those separate reviews are going to be linked out below. And I will not be covering accessories. I will not be taking accessories into the consideration because I feel like the figures need to stand up on their own, and it'd also be a little unfair because some of these McFarlanes didn't really come with any accessories at all, or they came with very few compared to others that came with a bountiful arsenal of weaponry and accessories. So because of that, I felt like it was a bit of a injustice to pit them against each other utilizing accessories. So I'm kind of withdrawing from utilizing that particular factor in ranking these Batman. Which means, yes, Flashpoint Batman will not be utilizing his guns this time. Sorry, it's not gonna happen. Let's get started with this countdown, and there are going to be honorable mentions. However, we'll cover those before we get to the number 1 spot. Barely making the cut at number 5 is going to be the Todd McFarlane designed Batman. I know that he is somewhat in the avenue of teetering on parody because of the way of his aesthetics being very much Todd McFarlane-y. In terms of like the costume with the little pointed shoulders and the angles and the ginormous amount of spikes he's got going on his gauntlets and the pockets around his utility belt. But there's just something about the uniqueness of this design that I find aesthetically pleasing and very, again, different than any other Batman that I've encountered thus far here, because they all have something that's very usual for Batman to sport on his costume, but there's something about this one, whether it be the much more narrower and complacent cape here that doesn't take up too much space, along with the different kinds of, like I said, design choices, especially with the girthiness of how different he is versus the other McFarlanes. And that's how he's able to kind of barely scrape by on the number 5 spot. There were a couple of others that he was in point of contention with as far as nailing that number 5 spot, but ultimately I settled on him because of how much different he is versus the others and how much he stands on his own in terms of uniqueness. At number 4 is going to be Hazmat Batman. Yes, I know that he's actually really easy to find right now, especially if you go out to your local Target. Recently, every time I've done a Target run, he's there, either in gold label form or in the standard form like you see before you're here. The gold label I have yet to cover. I actually did manage to scope out a gold label for myself that comes up with the light up feature. But even without that feature, I would say that there's, again, a level of uniqueness to this McFarlane, but there's also a level of heft and quality to the plastic pieces on the symbol on his chest, as well as the mask. I don't know, there's something about that added level of detail there that just makes the figure kind of stand out to me a bit more. The articulation is also fairly good, and there's also a bit about the sculpting with the tank on the back, as well as the shoulder pieces and the padding and the armor going along his costume, that to me, I feel is one of my favorite McFarlanes thus far, that stood out to me. That felt to me like this needs to go up in the top ranking. Maybe not in the top 3 spots, but definitely securing number 4. And I've always liked it where, if done right, piping and little tube effects going along certain figures, especially with one like Hazmat Batman here himself, stands out to me a lot, and I like it whenever they're able to pull this off very well. So that is how Hazmat Batman ends up being in my number 4 spot. Number 3 may potentially anger some folks, but I'm gonna go ahead and call it here based off of gut instinct. It is going to be Arkham Knight Batman. Oh my god. Actually, I feel like this potentially leads to the issue as to why I put him at number 3. Even though he is still ending up in the top 5 rankings, because this is ultimately a really beautifully sculpted interpretation of the Arkham Knight armor from the third and final Rocksteady Batman game. And they got the armor down pat. Like, there's so much beautifully sculpting and paint applications going along this thing that ultimately, even back from when I first covered this in September or October, and becoming one of my more popular videos on the channel, there's a reasoning for that. And that's because McFarlane was able to hone in on what made this costume really special from that game. And the head sculpt is so many leaps and bounds better than the DC collectible version, in my humble opinion. I would probably say the only reason why he then falls down to number 3 and not in the number 2 or 1 spot is because, as you pointed out right there, the cape is a little bit too big. You know, over the course of time, I noticed that he's a little difficult to display next to other figures, let alone Batman figures, because of just how much cape overlap there's going on. And I feel like this guy is probably one of the biggest culprits of them all. And also because these legs aren't as stable as they once were all those months ago. And because of that, I find myself relying a little bit too much on the cape. All that withstanding, however, there's just so much gone good or gone well about Arkham Knight Batman here versus going wrong. And because of that, I would say he's definitely one of my staples to own in any McFarlane toy collection, especially if you're a huge fan of the Rocksteady games. So yeah, those legs are a little bit weird, and because of that, he has to rely on the cape so that he doesn't bump into what is probably going to be my number 2, second to last favorite McFarlane Batman thus far. And again, I have yet to cover here on this channel, but it's probably the underdog of the entire lineup here, and that's going to be for Batman DC or Detective Comics number 1000 Batman, which was, like I mentioned in that review, a Batman figure that originally I really wasn't going to get. I think of all these Batman, especially the preliminary ones that I started this channel off with, as the ones that I looked at and went, yeah, I need to get those, like Arkham Asylum and Arkham Knight Batman, animated series Batman, etc., because there were parts of my upbringing, part of my childhood even. This guy, he's more so in line with the comics, specifically issue number 1000. Because of that, I was like, do I really want to get this guy? But as the channel kind of took off a little bit, I thought to myself, you know what? He's at least worth doing a review. And he, amongst all of these, even with some of the other surprises that I've had thus far, he's probably the most pleasant one that I've kind of encountered in my time reviewing these figures for this channel. And because of that, he ends up being in the number 2 spot with some of its more simplistic nature. You have all these different Batman with different little features and aesthetic choices that get a little convoluted and kind of lost within themselves. I would probably say number 1000 Batman here is able to stand on his own with his simplistic take on the costume, the articulation, and how smooth he is with the level of quality he's able to bring. So I guess that only really leaves us with the number 1 spot. But before we get to that, if I can get him to stand here, we definitely need to cover some honorable mentions. I will probably say that first and foremost, you guys probably noticed that Arkham Knight did make the cut. What about Arkham Asylum Batman? He definitely receives an honorable mention, but ultimately I had to cut one of those darlings because I don't want to get 2 Arkham game. I couldn't have 2 Rocksteady Arkham game versions of Batman in the same lineup right next to each other. One had to go. So I figured, okay, Arkham Asylum could probably get that honorable mention, and the primary reason is because even though he's a great figure, his legs are a little bit too straight, and plus those beady eyes he comes with are just the only little nitpicks I would have to get him out of that cut. Other honorable mentions are of course going to be Armored Batman, because ultimately I feel like that's one of the better interpretations of that Armored Batman from Dark Knight Returns as I've seen so far, because he kind of strikes a good balance between the comic booky look that he's got going on in Frank Miller's novel, as well as a much more somewhat down-to-earth McFarlane take. And then the Batman Beyond, because it is Batman Beyond, he's got a cool color scheme going on. And I felt like they kind of nailed the sculpting as far as having the McFarlane identity while at the same time looking very damn faithful to the interpretation we see in the cartoon. And then Three Jokers Batman, because of just how well balanced his overall costume is. I felt like the articulation was a little loose on my version of the figure, and that's probably what kind of eliminated him from being nominated in the top 5. But ultimately, I can definitely see why he's one of the sought-after figures for a lot of modders out there, people who like to make custom job figures. And I'd say Batman 3 Jokers is able to check all those boxes as far as being a very fulfilling Batman McFarlane. What is probably not going to be all that surprising, however, is my number 1 McFarlane Batman figure so far. And I could be playing some favorites here and a little bias based on my favorite color clash, scheme of colors as far as the red and the black and the gray, and that of course goes to Flashpoint Batman. Controversial accessories withstanding, it's mainly because of just how the complete package he really is thus far. I do wish that my mid-torso joint was a little bit on the tighter side because mine came kind of loose, but aside from that, it's the fact that they were able to faithfully adapt that particular version of Thomas Wayne's Batman while at the same time retaining just so many qualities from both the McFarlane side of things that they like to operate with the gothic nature of like the pointed shoulders and the oversized gauntlets, and at the same time making him look badass and not exaggerated, nothing too crazy or overdone, while at the same time that cowl with the red eyes, just so justice awesome. And the articulation across the board is still nailed very well with some swivel joints and great usage of the hands with the accessories, and then of course the added accessory of the holsters here. I know that this might not vibe with every single person because of the choice in hue for the red utility belt, but I just couldn't look away from this figure when trying to nail down at my number 1. It fell between him and, like I said, the underdog DC number 1000 Batman, and ultimately I could just not think of any other figure to claim the top spot for my favorite McFarlane Batman that I've covered on the channel so far. Which in turn then leaves us with 2 other McFarlane Batman that did not make the cut in either the top 5 or honorable mention. The Batman from the 2022 movie, for obvious reasons, the side eye and then the hand sculpted out to be this way that couldn't have been at least swapped out for the other hand where he's actually looking like just so many errors and mishaps happen with that figure, which is a huge shame because we could have had a great McFarlane Robert Pattinson Batman, and so many choices just hindered the experience of actually owning that figure. And then animated series Batman. I love Batman the animated series as much as the next guy, but if you're going for a figure that accurately represents the Kevin Conroy Batman you saw on Saturday mornings, you're better off going with DC Collectibles or DC Direct or some other kind of company that nails the actual look of the character versus the very white shoulder version that McFarlane chiseled out here with very, very weak feet to keep him actually standing firmly. Filming that stop motion for the April Fool's joke was a major pain in the ass, and due in no small part to that animated series Batman. I made a huge mistake choosing that figure for that particular skit, and I will not be doing that again. But that about just sums it up. So with that said, obviously there's going to be another ranking video of some form or fashion for the McFarlane Batman collection in due time. Probably gonna be doing these every like 6 months or so to then re-evaluate and re-rank all of the Batman in corresponding order. So there still may be a chance that the Batman 2022 or animated series Batman could make the cut if I were to expand it to not just a top 5, but maybe a top 10 ranking video come September when we finally hit 1 year of this channel being live and more McFarlane Batman to be covered up until that point, because we have plenty of more to cover on the channel, some of which I've already owned and are kind of hiding over there in the corner, and then others that have yet to be released from McFarlane Toys. And so if you guys want to stay tuned for those reviews as well as that updated ranking later on in the year, feel free to hit the subscribe button down below, turn on notifications, check out this other video, or better yet, no, check out this playlist showing up on screen right now to check out all of the McFarlane toy reviews that I've done so far on the channel. And until next time, guys, stay humble. And once again, thank you not only for watching, but helping the channel hit 1,000 subscribers. Here's to another 1,000 more. Thank you. Take care.